We already know that every time you drop something, no matter the object, it falls at the same rate, ignoring air resistance. If you drop a feather and a hammer in a vacuum, they fall at the same rate. But that's not always true. I'm going to show you when it's possible for something to fall faster than the pull of gravity. And the results of this are going to help us understand how energy is still conserved and also add a little more insight into the infamous fountain bead chain effect called the Mould effect. And finally, at the end, we'll even be able to understand how this is related to why chimneys always break in two before they hit the ground when they're falling. Now, if you take a stick with a ball sitting on one end and lift that end and drop it, something really weird happens. The stick seems to fall faster than the ball. If we slow it down, we can clearly see that the ball just follows a straight path down, the same as it would if I just dropped it without the stick. But the stick moves obviously faster than the ball. In fact, we can show that they're clearly falling at different rates when I put a cup on the stick, and the stick will fall so fast that it has enough time to move the cup under the ball and catch it before the ball hits the ground. 3, 2, 1. So how is this happening? Galileo based one of the earliest theories of falling motion on the fact that objects always fall at the same rate in free fall. And now we're seeing that it's not always true suddenly. Well, don't worry, we don't have to throw away modern science because of this. The key difference here is that in order for something to fall at the rate of g, it has to be in free fall. But our stick isn't in free fall. One end is constrained, so as it's falling, it's being pushed up by the table. That upward force changes the motion and causes the whole stick to rotate about the hinge. The end rotating with gravity can move faster than g, and the end rotating away from gravity will move slower than g. And that's exactly what we see when we look at both ends of the stick. And in fact, if we look at how fast the entire stick is falling on average, meaning its center of mass, we find that it's actually falling slower than g, because the hinge is partially supporting it. If I put a ball at the center of mass, we can see that the ball in free fall drops faster than the stick at that point. So the stick wasn't actually falling faster than g as a whole, only certain parts of it were. So this is comforting, but don't get too comfortable. In 2011, scientists were studying how chains fall to the ground. They knew that when a chain falls, each link as it falls at g. But they realized that this fact relies on the idea that once one link hits the ground, it gets decoupled from the links above it. It can't pull down on the links above. But they realized that's just an assumption. You can make all sorts of different chains. So they drew up some different chain scenarios. You can see in their paper that they imagined a link having a little rod that when it hits the ground, it pulls down on the chain above it, represented by this black ball here. Or even a simpler scissor lift type link. Or even simpler still, a tilted rod just like our initial setup. Now a chain made out of this type of link is actually doable. So what happens if you drop this type of chain on the ground? Well, then you get something even more amazing. Let me show you. I designed a crude setup of this where we have rods alternating the direction of tilt. I'm going to drop it on a table and then compare that to another chain that doesn't hit the table. But before we continue, I want to thank Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring this video. If I get injured on the job, I have nobody to blame but myself. But if you work for a company that isn't yourself and you've been injured because of their negligence, you can check out Morgan & Morgan. There's a reason why a single spark on your lab tabletop can turn into chaos. Just like there's a reason why Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury law firm. They're an injury law firm focused on working for the people and helping the little guy. The firm was built around the idea of helping individuals navigate a system that's already been paid into, but doesn't always deliver on its own. For example, the way insurance works is that you pay into it for years so that in the event something happens, you have money to help cover an injury or property damage. But in reality, a lot of people find that when they're injured, the outcome isn't what they expected. Claims may get delayed, denied, or paid out at a fraction of what the policy implies. Morgan & Morgan has been helping people pursue coverage for their injuries for over 35 years, with more than 1,000 lawyers across all 50 states. And they've recovered over $30 billion for their clients by pushing systems to actually follow through. The cool thing is that they work completely free unless they win. So you're not paying anything up front just to ask whether the system worked the way it was supposed to. Remember, not all law firms are the same, and when systems fail, having the right expertise can matter. So if you're ever injured, you can check out Morgan & Morgan at forthepeople.com/actionlab. Now let's get back to our experiment. Now let's watch what happens when I release both of these chains at the same time, but the one on the left is going to hit the table on the way down. And we see that the one that hits the table gets pulled down a little faster than the one that doesn't hit the table. Now my glued together contraption wasn't very good here, but in 2011 researchers did this same thing in a much more precise setup, and they found the same result. When the tilted rod chain hit the table, it fell faster than it would have otherwise. Now if this doesn't bother you, it should. When I first heard this, my mind immediately went to conservation of energy. Why don't we just use a system that collects the energy of the dropped rods? They're moving faster than they would under normal gravity acceleration, and since potential energy is just mass times gravity times height, if it's falling faster than g, then that would be getting more energy out than we put into it. But obviously that can't be true. So what's actually happening here? Well, when we drop a rod, there are two ways that the rod can slow down. One way is by hitting the table. The other way is by the rods above it pulling up on it, not letting it hit as hard. You can either hit the ground or pull up on something above you, even if that thing above you isn't connected to anything. When the tilted rod hits the table, it pivots just like in our stick example, and this causes the other end to swing down fast. But in this case, it's connected to the rod above it, so it tugs down on the chain above it. This speeds up the falling chain a little by slowing down the rod that just hit the table a little bit. So basically, the impact into the table is reduced because some of that momentum is transferred upward into the chain above. This is kind of like if you were holding onto a rope connected to some weights and everything was falling. Right before you hit the ground, if you tugged on the rope, you would hit the ground with a little less impact by using the inertia of the weights to pull you up a little bit. But the result of that is that you pulled down the weights, making them speed up a little more toward the ground. This happens with every impact. Early impacts are softened, but the chain as a whole speeds up. That extra speed has to be paid for. Later on, the chain hits harder than it would have otherwise. So even though this is a weird counterintuitive result, it still doesn't violate conservation of energy. The tilted rods hit softer at the beginning and harder at the end, but the total energy released is unchanged. And the important thing to realize is that the table isn't adding energy. It's just providing a reaction force to push against. All the energy comes from the gravitational potential energy of the chain at the start. Kind of like when you jump off the ground doesn't add energy to your jump, but you need it there to push off. Now that we understand how rods fall, we can start to understand why smokestacks seem to always break near the middle when they fall. If you've ever seen video or pictures of falling long smokestacks, they almost always break in two before they hit the ground. Now we can understand why they do that. Look back at our falling ball on the stick. Imagine now that the ball is the tip of the smokestack. It has inertia and it's heavy and wants to just fall straight down, but the rest of the stick is trying to fall faster than g. So if I connect these two, you see that it's trying to bend the stick like this. So inside the stick when it's falling, there's actually these bending forces trying to break it. A short stick like this can withstand the bending, but a long chimney made of bricks can't withstand bending forces, so it breaks in two before it hits the ground. Now, surprisingly, this same model helps us understand how Steve Mould's bead fountain works. If you aren't familiar with it, when you take a metal bead chain and let it fall out of a cup, the chain actually rises higher than the lip of the cup. Steve Mould and Electroboom had a gentlemanly, heated discussion about why this happens. The key idea is that the beads can be modeled as connected rigid rods that are being pulled upward on one end. As each stiff connection of beads leaves the pile, it pivots and rotates like a rod, basically the reverse of a tilted stick hitting the ground. But in this case, because we're pulling up on the rods, they're able to pivot and push off the rest of the beads in the cup. This means that for a given upward motion of the free end, it takes less work to pull on a stick that's constrained and can pivot compared to one that's not. For example, you can see that I have two rods connected by a string over a pulley. The rods are the exact same weight. So you would expect that if I let one rod dangle over the edge, the tension in the string exactly matches the weight, and so the rod on the table will not rise at all. But if I attach the string to the end of the rod, something different happens. When I dangle the other rod over the edge and apply the same upward tension as before, then the center of mass of the rod on the table can rise higher. Basically because the table is supporting or pushing up on part of the rod. So for a given upward pull, the rod that has the string on the end of it can rise higher in the air. So in the bead chain fountain, each bead segment behaves like a tiny rod being pulled at one end. As it's pulled upward, it must pivot. The pile provides the reaction force, just like the table in my rod demo. Because of that leverage effect, the falling tension can generate an upward impulse that lifts the chain above the rim. The energy still comes from the falling chain on the other side of the cup, but the geometry and rigid segments allow that energy to be redirected upward. I like this explanation because if you don't explain it this way, it seems like the cup or beads are somehow kicking the beads up into the air like they're adding energy. But in reality, they're just giving the beads something to push against. Now, Steve Mould did show this clearly in his video, but I wanted to highlight that the energy to give that kick always comes from the falling beads, not from the surface it's kicking off. So what these falling rods or beads actually shows is that our intuition about gravity isn't always correct. Falling at the acceleration of g isn't necessarily a law of nature, it only occurs in the special case of free fall. As soon as you add structure or constraints or rotation, motion can become much more dramatic without breaking any laws of physics. And thanks for watching another episode of the Action Lab. I hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't subscribed to the Action Lab yet, consider hitting that subscribe button and we'll see you next time.